The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. At that time, Jesus left Samaria for Galilee, for Jesus himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his native place. When he came into Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, since they had seen all he had done in Jerusalem at the feast, for they themselves had gone to the feast. Then he returned to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. Now there was a royal official whose son was ill in Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son who was near death. Jesus said to him, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The royal official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "You may go. Your son will live." The man believed what Jesus said to him and left. While the man was on his way back, his slaves met him and told him that his boy would live. He asked them when he began to recover. They told him, "The fever left him yesterday about 1 p.m. The father realized that just at that time, Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." And he and his whole household came to believe. Now, this was the second sign Jesus did when he came to Galilee from Judea. The Gospel of the Lord. So Jesus is back in Galilee, and he's back in Cana, where he turned the water into wine, and here he performs yet another miracle. But what is the miracle exactly? What is the miracle? Is it the restoration of the boy to health? Maybe. But notice that it's not just Jesus who says to the man, "Your son will live." As he's on his way back, his slaves meet him, the people who work for him in his household, and they also say to him, "Your boy will live." So you have now two different sides that the same message is coming from. It's coming from Jesus, and it's coming from the people in the man's household. They're both saying the same thing. Try to see the story now from the side of the people in the man's household, not from the perspective of the man himself. At home, what they see is that the master of the household goes off, the boy is still very sick, and then at some point he begins to recover and starts making great progress and returns to health. For them, it's not evident that a miracle has occurred. The boy has simply been restored to health. And there are any number of ways that one might be restored to health. And the natural ways are the most evident, the most normal, and the most expected. How do you get from that place of the whole household just thinking, okay, well, something has happened, the boy has been returned to health, we don't understand everything about nature and science and medicine and whatnot. How do you get from that point to this remarkable point at the end of the gospel? He and his whole household came to believe. His whole household came to believe. Not just the man himself, but all these many people for whom the only experience of this whole episode was simply seeing very naturally the boy grow ill, become close to death, and recover. How do those people come to faith? That's the real miracle. That's the real miracle here in this story. How does it happen? And the real turning point is precisely this moment where the master of the household, this royal official, meets his servants along the way, and they say something to him, and all of a sudden what happens is joy springs up in his heart. It's a bit like that episode at the end of Luke's gospel, when the two disciples who are walking away from Jerusalem, they end up speaking with the risen Jesus, not knowing that it is him. And it's only later, after he's broken the bread, and they recognize him in that all of a sudden they say, "Oh, right." They look back. Our hearts were burning along the way. There was something happening, and the joy fills their heart, and now they're able to see correctly from a more absolute perspective what was going on, and they can enter into the joy. Compare again this case to another situation we hear about in the gospel, the synagogue official who once again has a young child. It's his daughter in this case, and she's at the point of death. And he himself also goes to Jesus and pleads for Jesus to come and heal his little daughter. And very similarly, in the midst of this conversation with Jesus, people come from his household and they say, don't even bother him anymore. Why ask him any more questions? Why bother the teacher? Your daughter is dead. So here we have two households that have seen the children of the household grow close to the point of death, and they have a certain kind of natural understanding that's what's going on. In this case that we hear about in today's gospel, something remarkable changes, and it all changes because of what happens in the man himself who had this remarkable encounter with Jesus. And it's not just what happens at the moment of the encounter, it's what happens later that is important, when this joy bubbles up in his heart. It is going to be from this man's joy that he will then proclaim to them with a certainty that will be unshakable, that people in his household will be able to recognize and will, in a certain way, transmit that joy to them. Their own hearts are going to leap up when they hear about the joy that the master of the household has experienced. And it's through that transmission, that great kind of infection of joy, if you like, the reverse infection, that infection of joy now that the good news of who Jesus is, God with us, will be spread. That's the miracle. That's the miracle. All this happens at Cana in Galilee, and it's not just a throwaway detail. Cana, as John reminds us here, only a couple of chapters later, is where Jesus had made water into wine. In the Psalms, we praise God for giving wine to cheer our hearts. It's one of the great gifts that he gives us. And its principal feature, its principal characteristic, is that it brings joy. Wine and joy go together in the Gospels and in the whole of the Testaments. Jesus is making wine yet again here in Cana. He's making wine again. And it's that deep fundamental wine of the joy that bubbles up in our life. If Christianity is just a magic trick, it's not worth your attention, my attention. We shouldn't give it more than 2 minutes. It's kind of an interesting diversion in a way. And after a while, it's no longer even interesting anymore. If Christianity is just a magic trick, look, I can make water turn into wine. It's not that useful and interesting. But what Jesus is showing us in this sign is that he converts water into wine in a much more profound way. And it helps to go back to the natural way that water is converted into wine, because even that is miraculous, and we so take it for granted. Water is converted into wine through the mediation of a grape and a number of processes that happen to a grape. And that's what's happening in this man's life, the royal official. Jesus is going to bring forth wine out of this man's life, which is as plain as water. Plain as water. Think about how water gets converted into wine in a grape. So you've got the water and all the nutrients of the soil, the sun, that takes in a very natural way all these good things and concentrates them into the grape. And this undoubtedly was the experience of this own man, this royal official, in his family. He's a successful man. He has a great family. He clearly loves his son very much. He has a well-ordered household. He has people who work for him that respect him. He has a great and very fruitful flourishing happening. All these good things get more and more concentrated in his life, and the fruit comes forth. How easily we can identify with that. That's the part of the Christian life that we tend to like. It's what we're most drawn to. Even outside the world of the Christian context, people can understand that bit. The kind of concentration of resources to make me fruitful. We work so hard at this. How many years do doctors go through training to be a medical professional? You know, we understand about the concentration of resources to produce good fruit. And we would very much like for everything to stop right there. Just the flourishing of more and more fruit. But if you stop there, you've got a grape and you don't get wine. And wine is much better than a grape. Much better than a grape. We don't praise grapes in the Psalms as what cheers men's hearts. No, we praise wine. But to get from grape to wine, you have to go through an important step in the middle. And that is the plucking of the grape, taking it off of its the place in which it receives the infusion of life, plucking it off that, and then pressing it, subjecting it to tremendous pressure, so that all the good that's been concentrated inside the grape can now ooze out. And when it oozes out, it's now in a position where it can ferment. This man's been under tremendous pressure. He's seen his son come to the point of death. He is in the pressure cooker. And when he comes to Jesus, Jesus screws up the pressure even greater, because he says to the man, he challenges him, what are you here for? Are you just here for more fruitfulness? Are you just here to pack ever more nutrient into your grapevine? Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will not believe. You've got to go beyond that point. You've got to go to the point where now all the goodness can be allowed to ooze out much harder. So he tightens the pressure even more. And the man responds correctly, because he shows his great love for his child. Sir, come down before my child dies. He allows himself to go to the place of tightening pressure. And then Jesus can say, wonderful, okay, it will be done for you. Now you can make wine. You've been willing to let yourself be put in the pressure cooker. Now you can make wine. So between that moment and the moment that he greets his servants along the way is the time of fermentation. Something's happening with him. From the outside world, you can't tell a single thing is going on. Cannot see a single thing. And yet the essential thing is happening, the great fermentation. It's the time of contemplation. And it is the time, frankly, my friends, that I think we are in now in a special way. We've been subjected to a great deal more pressure, the tightening of pressure in this great pandemic that we're facing. But now's the time of fermentation. It's the time of contemplation, where the Lord can make that rich and fruitful in us. Will we use this time of fermentation precisely for that moment? The bubbles can come up. The grape juice can be turned into delicious wine. And that wine will cheer our hearts. That is the real miracle in today's gospel. That is the miracle in your life and mine. Can I let the Lord take me from the place of more and more fruitfulness, more and more things, Lord, concentrate the goodness in my life, to the tightening of pressure, to the moment when it can all ooze out. You can do that, Lord. And then in this spirit of contemplation, make me into good wine. Help me to experience the joy of your life. Amen.